So the double house, Le Corbusier, 1926, a fantastic structure. Modernists wish their buildings to speak of the future of progress, democracy, speed and technology. Many of these things were quite new and certainly worth celebrating. New materials such as plate glass, mild steel, concrete, they sought to express those very honestly, very clearly, shaping into platonic volumes, flat roofs and slabs, strip windows, pilotis, etc., providing the architectural vocabulary for a new aesthetic. Structure was expressed, windows flush, finished as flush as possible. The fussy language of water management, drips, sills and overhangs were abandoned, which might be fine in the south of France. Is maybe not so good a thing in Ireland, but there was an aesthetic there that went with the world view. Thermal comfort, I think, was generally poor. Environmental sustainability and things like energy conservation, they were either unknown as concepts or they were viewed as unimportant. And it could be said that early modernism, like Total War, was a final perfect expression of the energy, power and confidence of the Industrial Revolution. Society, particularly architects, we're still drawn to the excitement and visual expression of the modernist experiment. Even now, with sustainability and increasing focus, we're far more drawn to the look than the reality, and we don't like that. Here's an example from about the last, 10 years in London. Pilotis and glass, the glazing pushed as far forward as possible. An example, lovely school in Austria, cast concrete, raw concrete on the outside, giving a very tense expression with windows punched forward and brought forward flush or pushed back, shadow and light played with. Express structure, perhaps a kind of an update of Mies, but I'd have to say probably extraordinarily difficult to make thermally satisfying. Contrasting materials, the drama of flush glass in Potsdamer Platz. So there's amazing and beautiful architecture being created and still is, but there's also a problem. The implication of a 60% jump in Ireland in installation standards since 2005 for architecture and aesthetics are historically unprecedented. I mean, this is extraordinary. This is a blink in time for 60% jump in the minimum, the worst we're allowed to do. Part L is a regulatory response to improve thermal comfort, increase national and personal fuel security, meet international protocols and minimise climate change. It's an imperfect document. I don't necessarily claim that it's the answer to everything. I don't necessarily agree with everything in it, but it's there. It's a regulatory response. What we need is a societal response, and we, a lot of people in this room, but also society in general, we choose what that is. Man-made global warming and climate change are real. There's at least 9 identified in that particular document from the Stockholm Institute. There's at least 9 different ways in which our biosphere is being pressurized. In at least 3 of those, we've already exceeded any sort of sensible limit, and some of them were out of control in terms of, let's say, biodiversity loss. Climate change is quite likely we've actually exceeded the 350 million parts per million that were regarded as being necessary to hold in order to stop rampant climate change, and other things like nitrogen, acidification of the ocean. There's a lot of different things here telling us you're doing something wrong. You've got to reconsider where we're at. The notion that there could be 10 billion people on this planet is nonsense. They won't actually survive. You need a healthy environment to support huge increases in population. So we do have some things that are telling us we've got to reconsider what we're doing. Some parts of the world are already becoming less habitable, creating climate change refugees. These are not things we like to talk about, but they are real. Climate change may seem unrelated to modern life in normal Ireland, in moderate Ireland. It is not. The regulations, and this is from the natural step, even that funnel, the notion of that funnel is just telling us that we will hit barriers. They could be lead prices increasing, it could be regulations changing, it could be lack of affordability, it could be an economic crash. There can be many different systems. We can either choose to adopt and to adjust and to move through that notional funnel, or we can have a really unpleasant experience and possibly even cease. I mean, these are not... We can adapt, we can choose an aesthetic, we can choose a way of designing. How we respond culturally, including a new aesthetic expression, will determine how effectively we mitigate change and build resilience. And particularly in this country, we massively need to build resilience. And embracing that and finding an aesthetic, finding a culture, enjoying the process of actually creating those solutions and actually being openly engaging what those are, will actually hugely affect our success in doing that. So what could underpin this aesthetic? Now, these are some rules I've just put down on page. I'm sure a lot of people in this room would be very happy to put their own rules down. They're notional, they're mites, so please don't be offended. But for instance, I would suggest that aesthetic choices should enhance environmental performance, not hamper it. Every day we're designing things that actually hamper environmental performance but look beautiful. Design choices in aesthetics should make low thermal bridging in airtight conditions easy and less costly to achieve. Reduce, reuse, recycle, renewables. This is a hierarchy to design with. I'm definitely against bolt-on technology. I'm definitely against the Bing and the Buzz and the electronics solving our problems. They're not architectural in the first place, but they're add-on. We have to fundamentally solve our problems, and I think there's beautiful architecture in that. For materials, construction waste, power, water, food, new build and retrofit, all are related. Dumb, passive and easily managed. I actually think that in general is more sustainable than complex, active and electronic. We should design out complex management wherever possible and maintenance needs. Notwithstanding Rule 4, buildings can be comfortable. They can be robust machines for living in, exceeding Le Corbusier's dreams. But I think that comes down in the hierarchy before the other 4. Materials with a low global warming potential should be preferred whenever possible. We need to save carbon now. It's the most urgent thing we need to do on this planet. We need to abate and sequester whenever we can. And 7, and this may be contentious, I would suggest that only buildings that are fully compliant with the building regulations should be published and should win awards. And I know of many examples in this country and other countries that are not the case. And I think that gives the wrong message to the public, it gives the wrong message to other architects. I think it's insulting to the architects that work very well. But I think beautiful aesthetics and gorgeous, beautiful buildings can be absolutely sustainable, genuinely sustainable, and also meet the building regulations. I think we just need to work on it. Looking at some of the things in the building regulations and touching on that theme of glass earlier on, interestingly, we know about this particular graph, we know about the 25% as a reference value. If we actually look at that for a moment, these are the kind of values for that 25% of the floor area to be represented in glazing of the structure and how that's changed over the years. If you can't see it, it's gone 2.2 to 2 watts per meter square Kelvin in 2008 and even now 1.6. A very, very significant change. Bear in mind, the first change represented supposedly a 40% jump, and we're now looking at only, in theory, notionally, another 20% jump on the 2005 regulations. But look at the increase in thermal values. It is very hard to see. This is an extraordinary change, and it does demand high technology. There are questions as to how comfortable that is, how appropriate that is, absolutely. The regulatory impact analysis, which is the government's way of proving to itself and to its own minister, to the department's way, well worth looking at, actually shows much higher values. It shows 9 dwellings in Ireland, representative dwellings, and to achieve minimum compliance, it's showing U values for those windows, whole values of 0.9 to 1.3 watts per meter square Kelvin. So if you think you're designing to 1.6 watts per meter square Kelvin, you're actually wrong. You're not going to comply. So this is for new build. We're really pushing way beyond minimum standards, and it is very onerous, and there's big questions to be asked about that in all sorts of ways. The default windows in deep come to only about that line. Double glazing and triple glazing, according to NSAI's database, perform further, and so it's very clear immediately we'll have to move pretty much everything to triple glazing in terms of mere compliance. And passive house windows go beyond that again, are at the far end of that, going even lower. Now, if we take an example dwelling, and there's aesthetics deeply embodied in this, we look at the glass box extension, much loved of our architectural competitions and many architects, and we look at, let's say, the ope area being 70% of the floor area. This is a simple extension across the back of the building, full height glazing, etc. Well, what does that look like? Well, the line is shown on the left there. I know it's hard for some of you to see. We're looking at a performance in 2005 of 0.95 watts per meter square Kelvin already, so it's already triple glazed if it was compliant in 2005. And in 2011 we're now talking about 0.7 watts per meter square Kelvin. That's in the territory of quadruple glazing. Now you could say, well, we just have to have the biggest windows possible, we have to have quadruple glazing. I'm not convinced that that's sustainable. I think the reason the regulations are there, rather like that funnel, is they're telling us we've got to remake our aesthetics. There's plenty that's good there. There's fantastic, beautiful buildings that are already in aesthetic, already environmental, already sustainable, and were so even 20, 30 years ago, whatever. But we do have an opportunity to revisit the assumptions, the emotions, the prejudices, and the creativity of the early part of the 20th century, and to see what's relevant now. Now, these buildings here, just as an example, they're both looking at the flush glazing context, the context where we're bringing glass to the front of the building, which we so love, that tight skin, etc. There's two different representations, two different ways of achieving it, one on the left, one on the right. Just to say very quickly, the firm on the left, they were looking at installing a blind system in the cavity zone. So the amount of insulation available to connect back to the window, this is kind of technical, was very, very little. It's almost an afterthought. The thermal bridge value of that is 0.18 watts per metre Kelvin, okay? So for every metre, you're losing 0.18 watts per Kelvin. On the right-hand side, the architects were maybe more focused on this. You can see the insulation path. They've even expressed in a panel directly above the window an aesthetic which represents the insulation line beyond the window. So they're really they're playing more with the aesthetic of what they're trying to do. And this message has been given to us, which is the kind of thing we like to see architecturally. The heavy concrete means that the insulation line in terms of continuity has been significantly stretched, and we end up with actually a surprisingly high U value there as well, or sorry, thermal bridge value, a psi value. These are two examples from the building fabric design course that we're now running in the RAI, and it's just an example. These buildings probably do not have, they could have the same aesthetics, they could have be as attractive if we wish to make them, but what I'm saying is they're thermal bridge free. These details here have 18 times less heat loss for every metre than the previous designs. Now, is that acceptable? There's an aesthetic in the previous examples which is driving much poorer performance immediately, every day for that homeowner and the planet. This is an example from the UK where an architect that we've helped have achieved a Y value of 0.046 for a very exciting and you'd say modernist building. Half or almost half of the ACD values, and again very good thermal bridging. And very little is sacrificed in terms of aesthetics, but the performance is there. These are three different buildings, radically different. I'm not saying one of these is sustainable and the others aren't. All of these are looking to be sustainable. The hempcrete house is rather twee in appearance. It's the one at the top with the pitched roof. It is rather twee in its appearance. It sequesters carbon. Every element of that building is locking in carbon. It's simple and it works. Aesthetically, it needs some help. The building beside it is made of plastic and steel, and it's bolt-on technology, and it's appealing to a very kind of a commercially driven aesthetic. The one on the bottom right, Bill Dunster's, what I like about it, you can argue the aesthetics. I'm not here to tell you that that represents sustainability, but what's interesting about it is a machine for living in, and there's an awful lot of elements in it that are an expression of a desire to be sustainable. It's integrated, it's not bolt-on. And there we've got the elements of the green roof, we've got the thermal storage, we've got the good solar gain, we've got all sorts of elements, rainwater harvesting, etc. And kind of think the last slide. Here, in terms of that sixth rule that I was talking about, global warming potential and sequestering, the installations at the top there that are most, you can barely see this, are most emitting their global warming potential for the amount of insulation you're using, the amount of years in terms of payback of carbon is far higher. We're looking at XPS, we're looking at closed cell, sprayed foam. Below that, in that close group, which is then broken down below, we're looking at things from mineral wool right down to cellulose. And at the very bottom, cellulose, a recycled product, is also the most environmental product that's there. And surely it makes sense to use that. This is to show the obligatory architects project. This is a little hempcrete studio at the bottom of my garden. And just to say that 1 hectare grows a hempcrete house in 100 days, while enriching the soil and sequestering tons of carbon. Surely that's a good thing. And my final question to you is, what would you propose as the basis for an aesthetic of sustainability? Thank you.